Relay, we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this per tweet from Michael Benson. Chris Eubank Jr.'s promoter, Cale Sorland, has accepted that, under the BBBOC's rules, they would need to seek permission from the BBBOC in order to fight Conor Benn next in the UAE. He insisted the Liam Smith rematch talks are continuing. Wait a minute. You're telling me that Chris, not Conor, has to seek approval from the BBBOC to box Conor? To box him in a different country, an entirely different region of the world. You have to start to wonder, what's really going on here? What's at the heart of the matter? Why is the BBBOC? Why are they taking such a hardline stance with this? What are the legalities of all of this? Is it possible that they could penalize Chris Eubank Jr., not Conor Benn, Chris Eubank Jr. for boxing Conor Benn? How's that work? The BBBOC's Robert Smith has declared that it is unlikely they would give permission for Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn in the UAE. We have a boxer who has recorded positive doping tests who hasn't been cleared, so it would be disrespectful to the sport. Yeah, but aren't you stepping on people's toes? You haven't actually issued a punishment or a banment of any kind to Conor Benn, so how can you penalize Chris Eubank Jr. for boxing him? Can they actually do that? No, I don't know if they can, though. The proposition that they might be enough to scare Chris Eubank Jr. and the Sarlin brothers into doubling back on that Conor Benn fight. That's if Chris doesn't want to face a banment of some kind himself. If he doesn't want to run those risks, the safer choice would just be running it back with Liam Smith. In truth, I'm not at all excited to see Conor Benn box Chris Eubank Jr. I don't think that fight is now what it was before this entire fiasco kicked off, before Chris Eubank Jr. got himself knocked out by Liam Smith. It don't got the same sizzle.
It's not about us using another commission in the jurisdiction of the British Boxing Board of Control. This is about Conor fighting internationally, approved by the commission in that country, and if they don't grant Chris Eubank Jr. permission to box, that's up to them, and it will be up to Chris Eubank Jr. to fight under perhaps the jurisdiction of the country that we're performing in. But all very strange and sad. And when I talk about I want to bring everybody together, Robert Smith makes those comments, then Conor Benn goes berserk, and it's a huge restraint of trade. I mean, the board are actually contacting commissions around the world, asking them not to license Conor Benn, which is absolutely outrageous.
Come on. Tell me it doesn't strike you guys as odd that the BBBOC are going as far as contacting foreign commissions in order to prevent Conor from boxing. Robert Smith has got a hard dick for Conor Benn. Got a hard on for that guy. It's not enough that he doesn't plan on boxing in the United Kingdom. You want to prevent the guy from boxing at all. Because of what? Because of adverse findings by way of an anti-doping commission you don't work with or adhere to. Can't stress this enough that when Billy Joe Saunders tested positive for a banned substance here in America ahead of the Demetrius Andrade fight, the people over there at the BBBOC weren't doing to him what they're doing to Conor Benn now. After testing positive for that banned substance and the fight being called off altogether, Billy Joe Saunders went back to the UK and boxed in Manchester that same year.
I mean, this is one of the problems in this whole situation. You've never heard the board comment publicly to the media. It's like a propaganda mission, and to talk about having power over other jurisdictions internationally, it's a very awkward conversation legally, and we have to get our position on it as well. He wants to stop Conor Benn fighting internationally or stop British fighters having the opportunity to fight him. We'll see how that plays out. But for me, our plan, Conor Benn fights in June, unquestionably. That's down to the team, and down to if they want a licence with the British Boxing Board of Control. And again, Robert Smith and the British Boxing Board of Control, when I talk about we need to get these two together, but they both need to drop the ego. Conor Benn is at massive fault there, and so are the board. They're coming out, and if you think right now that Conor Benn is going to get a fair crack of the whip with the British Boxing Board of Control, the way they're commenting, the way they're treating, the way they're behaving publicly, ask yourself that honest question, and this is a problem.
The real problem is Conor Benn never actually proved his innocence. He may have gotten the rank by way of the WBC. He might have convinced them that he didn't do anything wrong or he didn't knowingly do anything wrong, but the BBBOC... They want to nail him to the wall. They want to make an example out of him. Though I've never seen the BBBOC go after a guy the way they're going after this guy. You've run him out of the UK. Now you want to cut off his exits. What's bordering on blackmail. Or threatening to issue
out a penalty to any British fighter that shares the ring with Conor Benn.
You're saying they need to seek your approval first.
Even if they themselves haven't done anything wrong, even if they themselves don't have any adverse findings by way of an anti-doping association.
I don't know that Chris Eubank Jr. wants to run those risks when Robert Smith and the people at the BBBOC are already saying here and now they are unlikely to grant him approval to box Conor Benn abroad.
I mean, unless you're thinking about retiring.
If you have intentions of boxing for another year or two, maybe you don't want to run these risks.
That is, if you plan on boxing on British soil. Chris Eubank Jr. might.
He might, but what about Kell Brock, who very recently came out of retirement? He's a guy who's in a market for a Conor Benn fight, isn't he?
His career's technically already over.
How many more fights do you think this guy wants to have? Perhaps him being in the twilight years of his career already, will not be so easily dissuaded by the BBBOC and their threats.
If the BBBOC can't convince a foreign commission, say one in the UAE, to play ball.
If they decide to license Conor and his opponent anyway, in spite of the BBBOC's wishes, the only leverage they have is dispensing punishment to boxers, British boxers that plan on boxing on British soil. That may or may not be Kell Brook. He might be happy fighting over there in the Middle East.
For what remains of his career, he might.
And those fights happening in the UAE or just that region of the world will still be marketed to a British audience, even if it's not on British soil.
Pretty much.
There's something strange about all of this. Well, it's only really a consequence to any fighter that plans on boxing on British soil. If you're talking about, a Mexican fighter,
Right.
American fighter,
Right.
Eastern European fighter, a Russian fighter, maybe a guy from Kazakhstan.
If you're not talking about a boxer that plans on boxing on British soil in the foreseeable future, then that removes all of the BBBOC's leverage and or idle threats in the situation.
What if you're talking about Conor Benn going in there with black cops? Black cops don't box in Britain.
So what the hell are they gonna do about it?
I think they'd be powerless to stop him, powerless to stop the fight from taking place. In a situation like that, the BBBOC...
They might have a hard-on for Conor, but there's only so much they can do. Their reach can only extend but so far.
No, I don't think they can stop him from boxing abroad. Moreover, I don't think they can stop everybody from boxing him. And just in keeping with the theme of all things Matchroom, Anthony Joshua wants Joe Joyce. Dillian Veit doesn't interest me so much, and why would he? He knocked him out in sensational fashion years ago. Years later, there's not much reason to run it back with Dillian. For what?
Just get some new blood, some fresh meat.
Dillian White, not so much, but it is what it is. Joe Joyce interests me the most. Wilder interests me, but because I feel like this situation with Fury and Wilder, it's just been back and forth, I would leave that to my team. I like the Joe Joyce fight. I think that's the one that interests people, and Joe Joyce is from the same country as me, so it makes sense.
Fiscally it does. Anthony Joshua versus Joe Joyce in the United Kingdom. That could be a stadium fight.
Provided that Anthony Joshua makes it through Jermaine Franklin this weekend, and I think he can. I think he will. I think he's going to stop that guy.
I think he made the right choice in Derek James. Of the three options that were on the table at that time, Virgil Hunter, Roy Jones Jr., and Derek James, I think Anthony made the right choice.
And I think we're going to see that this weekend. Joyce has been open to the fight for some time now, looking for a chance at avenging his amateur loss to Anthony Joshua from 2011. The issue with this fight is that it involves competing promoters and competing platforms.
Anthony Joshua is the A-side to Joe Joyce here and now.
He is the bigger draw of the two. That's why Anthony's at the O2 and Joe Joyce is at the Copper Box.
And Joe's a good fighter. I'm not saying he's not a good fighter. I'm saying he's not the same draw here and now that Anthony Joshua is. Even after 2 consecutive losses, Anthony Joshua draws more and is worth more money. That's why he's playing a bigger location in front of a bigger audience.
So we all know how this works. We all know how this goes. If Anthony's the A-side to Joe, the rightful thing to do is just send him over.
You're a wide-eyed optimist if you're expecting Frank Warren to do that.
When asked about the fight, Frank Warren said, well, he hasn't got to go far. If he wants to fight him, just pick the phone up, provided my man comes through, and he comes through, we could do that in the summer. Not a problem.
It sounds easy enough, but Frank Warren won't part with Joe Joyce so easily.
It's not as simple as just sending him over to Matchroom. Frank Warren, knowing the size and scale of the fight, what it could be, he's gonna want to be involved.
I think he will, and that will, in effect, complicate things.
It could. It's not gonna be like when Matchroom sent over Felix Cash to the Queensberry side of things to box Denzel Bentley. It's not gonna be like Matchroom sending John Ryder over to box Zach Parker.
Frank Warren will not part with Joe Joyce as easily as Matchroom parted with them, parted with those fighters, and allowed them to cross over.
Joshua versus Joyce in the UK is a hot ticket, and I reiterate, Frank's gonna want to be involved.
Earlier this week, Eddie Hearn said that draft contracts for Joshua versus Fury could be exchanged next week.
The dichotomy of these negotiations would be somewhat different to negotiations with Joe Joyce. Anthony Joshua is the clear A side over Joe, but with Fury,
It's not as clear cut.
I had talks this week with George Warren, and fundamentally the original contract is still in place, and we all know that the timing is perfect now, as it happens because of the circumstances with Usyk, and that is the very last chance for this huge fight to happen. I expect to be exchanging pilot contracts with Queensberry soon. Maybe as early as next week. AJ knows there's a big opportunity at last. So much at stake now. But he also has his total focus on Franklin.
In this set of negotiations, unlike what we saw last year, Anthony wouldn't be coming off of 2 consecutive losses. He'd be coming off a win, presumably a win over Jermaine Franklin.
But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows when Frank Warren was asked about it. Frank Warren has downplayed Eddie Hearn's remarks about fresh Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua talks with George Warren. Frank told me it was a 30-second conversation. We've not even discussed it with Tyson. Really annoyed about that. Contracts in the next week? Absolute bollocks.
I'm not optimistic.
In truth, I'm not optimistic about either fight because before Frank Warren goes into a long, drug-out set of negotiations for a Joshua versus Fury fight or a Joshua versus Joyce fight,
Weren't they saying just a few days ago that if Joe Joyce beats Zhilei Zhang on the 15th, they're going to move him into a Fury fight over the summer?
isn't that what they were saying just a few days ago? Anthony Joshua was quoted as saying, I feel like this is my time, my era. I keep on rolling with the punches. I want to challenge for the heavyweight championship of the world again.
He said the time is now. He feels like the tables have turned on Tyson Fury, and he needs him right now. He needs Anthony Joshua.
And in some ways, he's right. Tyson Fury's stock right now is at an all-time low. Most boxing fans are blaming him for the Alexander Usyk fight's collapse. Everybody knows Usyk isn't a hard guy to work with.
He's not a diva. He's not a prima donna. Whatever happened, happened because of you.
It happened because of Fury, and people are blaming Fury. Tyson Fury's stock is at an all-time low, or the lowest at least it's been since circa 2015, 2016, when he made those inflammatory and bigoted comments that got him in the hot seat.
The boxing community, particular to this conversation, the British boxing community, wants to hold Tyson Fury's feet to the fire, and one way that he can smooth things over with them is delivering them another big fight. And the only other fight bigger
Than the Usyk fight? It's the Joshua fight.
That's right.
But it's for that reason that I don't think Eddie Hearn and Anthony Joshua should give that satisfaction to Tyson Fury so easily.
Let him sweat a while longer.
Let him be a social pariah a while longer. Let him experience that, and let that fester.
And let Frank Warren have to find him fights while all of this is going on. A couple of days ago, they were talking about putting Joe Joyce in there with Tyson Fury if he beats Zhilei Zhang. And they could do decent numbers with that fight.
But you won't do with Joe Joyce, what you could do with Anthony Joshua. Bide your time. Work with Derek.
Iron out the kinks.
You need more time with that guy anyway. Rome wasn't built in a day.
You're not going to become a completely different fighter overnight. If you really want to change things, and this is a new era, you need to measure your approach. And you need to make that guy sweat.
Tyson Fury, because in many ways he does need you now. There are not that many alternatives for him out there.
Alternatives to an Usyk fight?
Fights that get him a lot of money. There are not a lot of those kinds of fights out there for Tyson Fury, and you need to make him realize that.
When AJ boxed Alexander Usyk, the split was already determined by the order of the mandatory. It was 25%. He didn't have a belt. He was just a challenger in the heavyweight division. AJ took it on the chin because he wanted to be undisputed. He said, okay, fine, 75-25. He beat AJ twice. He unified the division. And Fury just offered him an extra 5%. The biggest payday of Alexander Usyk's career so far is bigger than the biggest payday of Tyson Fury's career. And on that, I bid you farewell.
I think the biggest payday of Tyson Fury's career would have to be what he made in the second Deontay Wilder fight, or maybe the third, which is approximately what, 30 mil?
25, 30 mil, somewhere around there.
Whereas when you think of what Alexander Usyk made from the second Anthony Joshua fight, when he went in as the defending reigning champion, what Eddie Hearn is saying is in keeping with what Alexander Krassyuk was saying just a few days ago. Everyone's trying to convince that Usyk would have his highest payday fighting Tyson Fury, but it's not true. It's not true. The money Usyk is supposed to make in this fight, probably 3 times smaller than what he made in his last fight. So it's not the payday for Usyk 100%. It's not even close to it. He accepted it as the man of boxing because he wanted to be a part of the heavyweight undisputed fight. He wanted to deliver this to the world, and especially to his homeland, to the country of Ukraine, where he is one of the biggest inspirations. The ballpark figure for Tyson Fury's highest guaranteed price is somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million, somewhere around there. Whereas the ballpark figure for Usyk's highest purse, what he made in the Joshua rematch, it's 2 times more than Tyson Fury's ballpark. He made approximately $75 million. And you remember who bankrolled the rematch? It was the Saudis and all that oil money they've got out there. Before you go questioning the validity of Eddie Hearn's statements and Alexander Krassyuk's statements, need I remind you who bankrolled that fight? Who made that happen? So what are you trying to convince me of, huh? What are you gonna do now? You gonna tell me the Saudis ain't got no money? In spite of Alexander Usyk participating in several box office fights, successful ones in the United Kingdom, and in spite of what he made opposite the ring Anthony Joshua in their second fight, he still accepted Tyson Fury's 70-30 split. Even though they costed him all the money that he could have been making in Saudi just to bring it to the UK where they lowballed him, they offered a unified Ring Magazine and lineal champion who made approximately $75 million in his last fight. They only offered him 30%, and he was willing to accept it. So long as the split would be reversed in a rematch. If he won the first fight, he'd get the split that Fury got from the first fight in the second. That's what they wanted, whereas Tyson Fury insisted he should still get half the pot even if he loses the first fight. Here we are. They shouldn't give him the satisfaction. They shouldn't give him the time of day. They should let him reap what he's sown for mucking up that fight.